Welcome to the Deep Dive. We pull apart a stack of sources, articles, research, historical notes, and we extract the nuggets you need to be well-informed, fast. Today we're tackling one of the most difficult and, frankly, intensely debated flashpoints in early history, the Banu Qurayzah incident. This all happened in 627, right after the pivotal Battle of the Trench. Our source material today is a really deep examination of the 50 most challenging questions around this event. So our mission here isn't to judge, it's to understand. We're trying to get beneath the surface of the controversy, looking at classical legal arguments, the brutal realities of, 7th century warfare, and weighing all that against modern ethics. This deep dive is focused specifically on the destruction of one of Medina's Jewish tribes.
And to really grasp the severity of what happened, you have to understand the stakes. You just have to. The community in Medina was under siege. The Battle of the Trench. I mean, it wasn't just another battle. It was a fight for survival, an existential sport.
I'm talking about a huge force, right?
10,000. 10,000 enemy Confederates surrounding the city, and their goal was nothing less than complete annihilation. Now, the Banu Qurayzah tribe, they lived inside the city's defense perimeter, and they were bound by a solemn treaty. Our sources say they were allegedly negotiating with the enemy at the gates.
Wow.
Just think of that. The enemy is outside, and an ally inside is thinking about opening the back door. This internal threat. It could have been the thing that led to the guaranteed slaughter of everyone in Medina.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the core question that makes this so challenging.
Yeah.
Was this a massacre, as critics so often frame it, or was it, the context of the time, wartime justice?
Classical scholars are extremely clear on this, and it's vital to get their perspective. They vehemently reject a word like genocide.
Why is the argument?
Their argument is that this was a specific judicial ruling for treason. It was against the adult combatant males of one tribe. It wasn't an attempt to destroy a whole religious or ethnic group. And crucially, they point to what happened before. There were other Jewish tribes, the Banu Qanuqa, the Banu Nadir, who were expelled from Medina for lesser betrayals.
Wait, expelled, not executed.
Exactly. The difference in punishment is said to reflect the difference in the threat. This tribe was accused of high treason during an existential siege. The danger was just on a completely different level.
That distinction, punishment fitting the strategic danger, is critical. But here's where it gets really interesting for me. The surrender paradox. The tribe eventually surrendered. So if the threat was gone, why didn't that guarantee them mercy? Why not just expulsion again?
Because of how they surrendered. See, according to the widely accepted narrative, it wasn't an unconditional surrender to the prophet.
It was conditional.
Yes. They insisted on being judged by Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. He was the chief of the Oz tribe, their former tribal ally. They were hoping for leniency based on old alliances.
So they chose their own judge, basically rolling the dice on an old friendship.
Precisely. And in the world of 7th century tribal law, when you submit to arbitration, you accept the outcome, whatever it is. Traditional accounts really stress that this wasn't a violation of Aman, a promise of safe conduct, but the fulfillment of an agreed-upon process.
We do have to pause, though, and just acknowledge the scale we're talking about, because this is what makes the incident so notorious. I mean, the numbers in the primary sources are staggering.
They are. Accounts from Ibn Ishaq and Al-Tabari, they estimate the number of executed men at anywhere from 400 to 900.
400 to 900, and then about 1,000 women and children were taken captive. The sheer scale suggests this was just an extraordinary event, even for that time.
It does, and that scale immediately pushes us into the legal and judicial framework that was used to justify it.
Right, so let's talk about Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. He's this, frankly, tragic and controversial figure in the whole story. The Banu Qurayzah picked him, gambling on those old political ties.
And what's fascinating here is the sheer dramatic weight of his situation. I mean, Sa'd was mortally wounded in the battle that just happened. He was literally giving this ruling while on his deathbed.
So they bring him in, gravely injured.
Yes. And he rules not with leniency, but with extreme severity. Execution of the men, division of property, and enslavement of the women and children.
And the sources tell us that the Prophet Muhammad confirmed this ruling.
Yes, and this ratification is absolutely central to the classical argument. The Prophet stated that Sa'd's judgment aligned with the judgment of Allah from above the 7 heavens. For that early community, this divine approval gave the decision a kind of irreversible, sacred legitimacy.
Now, this is where we need to spend some time, because he explains the legal context, not just the political one. Sa'd's ruling, as severe as it was, wasn't just pulled out of thin air, was it? Our sources point to a very clear parallel.
They do, and this is a critical piece of the puzzle that so often gets missed. Saad's ruling was seen by Muslims at the time as aligning almost perfectly with the laws for dealing with besieged enemies found in the Torah.
The Torah, meaning a source the Banu Qurayzah themselves would have recognized.
Precisely. We are talking specifically about the law laid out in Deuteronomy chapter 20. It deals with how to treat a city that's been besieged. It says you offer peace first. If they refuse, then upon victory, the law states you shall smite all the males thereof with the edge of the sword and take the women, children, and livestock as spoil.
So Saad's ruling,
Yeah.
it's almost identical to a legal framework that predated Islam, one that was part of their own tradition.
It creates a powerful historical and theological argument for the classical scholars. It suggests this wasn't some new act of brutality, but the application of a harsh, ancient standard for high treason in wartime. A standard that, in their view, was validated by previous divine revelation. It sort of removes the accusation of personal vengeance.
That's an essential insight for understanding how the 7th century mind processed this. Now let's pivot to one of the most specific, and I think for us today, most disturbing details in the accounts, the method used to decide who was liable.
This is a detail that sticks with you, and it really highlights the difficulty of applying law in a time and place like 7th century Arabia. There were no birth records, you couldn't just go by age.
So what standard did they use?
They used a physical standard, the onset of puberty. The specific criterion to determine if someone was an adult and therefore a combatant was the presence of pubic hair.
That's shocking to us today. But we have to understand the intent behind it.
The intent was pragmatic. It was meant to be a clear, objective test to spare non-combatant youth. And we have the famous example of a boy, Atiya al-Khwarizmi, who was spared because he failed this physical test.
So it did save some.
It did. But by modern standards, of course, executing adolescents feels barbaric. But in that context, it was a defined rule. It was meant to draw a line between those deemed fully responsible actors in the treason and those who were not.
It's a perfect illustration of that collision between historical context and our modern moral view.
Speaking of necessity, what about the captives? The women and children, they were sold. Was this just about accumulating wealth?
No, the sources frame this as an absolute strategic necessity. The women and children were sold in places like Najd to buy vital resources, specifically weapons and horses. You have to remember, the early Muslim state was operating on a razor's edge. They had just survived an attempted annihilation. They needed to arm their men, secure their borders. They were still facing a major threat from Mecca. Selling the captives funded their immediate defense. It was essentially war financing.
So, okay, we've established the 7th century context, the legal justification, the necessity, but we live in the 21st century, so what does this all mean when we apply our standards? I mean, we have to face the moral elephant in the room. Were these executions a war crime?
By the standards of modern international humanitarian law, yes. The Geneva Conventions, the mass execution of disarmed captives, regardless of the charges, is unequivocally a war crime. There is no debate on that front. So it's a clear-cut case by today's laws.
It is, but here is the nuanced consensus from scholars. Judging 7th century actions by 21st century laws is inherently anachronistic. It's applying a moral framework, things like universal human rights that just didn't exist anywhere in the world at that time. We risk making impossible judgments by projecting our standards backward.
And this brings us to that core theological challenge for believers today. If the Prophet Muhammad is traditionally called a mercy to mankind, how do you reconcile that with this severe act of justice?
The believer's defense, and it's a tough one, it centers on the idea of collective preservation. The argument is that mercy was shown by preserving the majority. The theological calculus was that allowing this treacherous element, the Banu Qurayzah men, to survive would guarantee future betrayals and the eventual annihilation of everyone in Medina.
So the harsh justice, in that bigger picture, was seen as an ultimate act of mercy for the greater number of innocent people, the whole community.
It's a challenging concept, but it is the bedrock of the classical defense for the action.
Let's shift now to the history itself. Because we rely so heavily on the written account by Ibn Ishaq, which was written down about a century after the event. And this is where modern historians start to introduce some serious doubt. How reliable are those huge numbers, the 600 to 900 men?
This is a really robust area of debate. Modern revisionist historians, people like W.N. Arafat and Patricia Crone, they suggest that those figures are likely inflated, or maybe symbolic.
And why do they argue that? What's the evidence?
They focus on logistics, on the practical impossibility of it all. Think about what the sources describe: executing 600, maybe 900 men over the course of a single day, maybe a single night.
That would be a massive operation.
A massive operation. It would have required huge logistical planning, constant labor, digging multiple large trenches in a very short amount of time. Critics argue that the early Muslim community, just recovering from a siege, lacking infrastructure, they simply didn't have the manpower or resources for something on that scale in that time frame.
So the suggestion is that the numbers grew in the retelling.
To amplify the victory, perhaps, or the severity of the justice. The core event, the siege, the surrender, the execution of the leadership, the captivity of the women, that's generally accepted by historians. It's attested in the earliest accounts. But the specific number, the sheer scale, that's where the academic uncertainty really lies.
And whether the number was 400 or 900, the ultimate legal conclusion drawn by classical jurists is the same.
Exactly. The event is framed as a singular, harsh precedent for dealing with high treason during wartime. It is not, according to mainstream scholarship, a general mandate for violence against non-Muslims.
Which is probably the most important takeaway for a modern listener. This isn't seen by mainstream scholars as prescriptive for modern interactions.
That's absolutely essential. The consensus is that you cannot apply a rule for 7th century high treason to justify modern political intolerance or, atrocities.
This has been a necessary, if challenging, deep dive. We've covered the existential context of the siege, the surprising legal justification rooted in the Torah, the grim details of determining combatant status, and the current academic debate over the reliability of the whole thing.
To maybe just reiterate the scholarly conclusion from the sources, the Banu Qurayzah incident is best understood as historically plausible, ethically disturbing through our modern lens, contextually explainable by the brutal laws of ancient warfare, and not normatively prescriptive for behavior today.
Thank you for joining us for this challenging and, I think, very thorough deep dive. We hope you feel armed with a new level of understanding about all the complexities here. Now, for you, the listener, here is our final provocative thought to mull over. If a leader in a desperate war of survival must choose between an act that will be seen as cruel by future standards and the guaranteed annihilation of their entire community, does historical necessity ever mitigate moral judgment? Or can it?